Hey kids, this is Lichtlaerm Audio's brand new amplifier, the Prometheus. And unlike the LCR-150 speaker video I posted the other week, I bought this with my own money and I paid full price, so it's not a sponsored video. But honestly, I'm biased. I like Lichtlaerm Audio a lot, so I thought you are entitled to know that. That being said, I sold 4 amps I like to fund this, and I have no regrets. But before I talk you to sleep, let me give you a quick rundown of what I plan to do in this video. And there are timestamps in the description as always to help you navigate. First of all, I'm going to show you the interface and the functions of the amp and give you a quick tone demo. But after that, I'm going to throw the gauntlet down and hook it up to my amp switcher and compare it to some of the best amps I own. In Greek mythology, Prometheus, a titan, stole the fire from the gods and gave it to the humans. And Zeus didn't think this was so cool, and to punish Prometheus, he strapped him to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains where I think some dude punched him in the groin for all eternity. Got that part wrong. He had an eagle peck out his liver every day, so yeah, that's almost as bad. Anyway, Heracles eventually got him out of that predicament and Zeus forgave him. Fast forward a bit and Prometheus is an amplifier now. And maybe he's about to steal fire from the gods again. The amp gods, that is. I asked you via 5 community polls against which amps I should shoot Prometheus out against. And now Prometheus is going to have to face 2 German 90s legends, the Diezel VH4 and the Engl Savage 120 Mark I. As well as the Marshall JVM 410 HJS to bring in the British flavor, the incredibly popular EVH 5150 350 watt, and the wildcard, my Framus Cobra, if it decides not to die on me. So buckle up, let's go. Lichtlaerm Audio's Prometheus is a 2-channel amp. We've got a clean channel on the top row here and the fun channel on the bottom row. Both channels have full 3-band EQs, bass, middle, treble, nothing unusual. But both channels also have different tone shaping options. The clean channel has the selector switch between a brilliant and a warm voice, and the fun channel, the high gain channel, has even more going on. You can choose between a vintage and a modern mode. The vintage mode has a little less gain, the modern mode has more gain, duh. But we also have the cut control here, which some of you might know from Lichtlaerm Audio's boost pedal, which I dare not pronounce. I don't want to ruin my perfect Lichtlaerm Audio pronunciation record. And we have the byte switch. I'll get into those a little bit later. We have a master section here with a master volume, global presence, global depth, and a noise gate. This amp has Lichtlaerm Audio's highly acclaimed key and gate integrated into it. It's triggered by the input here and can be switched on and off with these mini switches right here. Now there are a few other mini switches here. This one is labeled defeat, and what that does, it deactivates the preamp. So you could use different preamps if you wanted straight into the amp instead of the effects loop. If you have a Tonex pedal, for example, you don't have to go for some crazy 4-cable method setup, where you can just wire it into the front and you can control both with MIDI. Speaking of MIDI, all of those mini switches, apart from the byte switch and the brilliant and warm switch on the amp, are MIDI controllable as well. And speaking of MIDI, this is the optional MIDI foot switch that comes with the Prometheus. Look how cool that is. The graphics on that, the torch, fire, theme, Prometheus, you get it. And another clever feature of the amp is a 9-volt output on the foot switch, so you can power your pedals next to the foot switch. You don't need an external power supply if you don't have crazy pedal needs. There's also a 9-volt out on the back of the amp as well. This amp takes pretty much all different octal based power tubes that are out there: KD77s, KD88s, 6550s, 6L6s, 588s, EL34s. My one here has EL34s in it because I like EL34s, but the true reason is that was the most affordable option and I'm cheap. Now usually I start these videos on the clean channels of the amps, and while I'm sure a lot of you want to hear how the clean channel of this amp sounds, that's not why most of you are here, so I'm not going to torch you. This is how the amp sounds in modern mode on the fun channel. Sounds super tight and aggressive and a very nice balanced tone, and this is without a boost, mind you. You can add a boost as well, it takes boosts very well, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the fun channel first. So I already mentioned in the intro that the cut control and the bite switch here allow you to change the voicing of the amp a bit, and I'd say it goes a bit further than that. Those controls together with the gain knob really allow you to affect how the amp responds to your playing. You can make it sound really tight, but you can also make it sound loose and old school. Let's dial the cut control all the way back and put the bite switch in the middle, which is the least aggressive, at least to my ears. Let's go down with the gain a bit, see where it's stuck. So quite a bit of gain for that lowest setting. Let's move up a bit. Starting to get a lot more saturated here. And we can go up even further from here. Now this is way more gain than I would ever use, but I've set it this way purposely to show you what the cut control does. Let's dial up the cut. That tightens the amp up quite considerably. Let's dial that all the way to the max. And all of a sudden we're much tighter. And that already affects how the amp responds drastically. All the way to the left, it's really slow and sludgy. All the way to the right, it gets really tight and percussive. What I believe the cut control does is, I think it shapes the guitar signal before it even hits the amp. So it cuts off a whole bunch of frequencies, particularly in the low end, and hence we get the perception of less gain, which allows us in the most extreme setting to really dial up the gain to the max without it sounding overgained. A very interesting tool. It gets better though. We can shape the tone even more with the bite switch. Let me go back to my preferred gain and cut control settings, which are both around 1 o'clock, and let me just chug a few chords while changing the bite switch settings. Affects the frequencies we're hearing quite a bit as well. I was speculating that this might switch in different cathode resistor and capacitor pairings on one of the early stages, but I decided to ask Daniel instead, and what he told me is it switches different capacitors in a voltage divider in between two stages, so it boosts different frequencies. Very cool if you ask me. And together with the cut control, you can really make the amp respond whichever way you want it. You can make it respond really fast and tight, or you can make it a bit slower. And that way you can make the amp almost sound and feel like it's already boosted, even if you don't have a boost engaged. It reminds me a bit of Engl amps, but you can add a boost to this as well, and it works quite remarkably. Let me add in this King in Yellow. Really cool, if you ask me. And the cool thing about this amp is you can really gain it up. And it always sounds stable, healthy. With some amps, I find that once you dial the gain over a certain threshold, the amp starts to feel uncontrolled, unstable. This one doesn't do it. Like, I've got the gain really high, it's boosted, the cut control is lower. Got a bit too excited there, knocked my King in Yellow over. And that is already way more gain than I'd really use, but the difference between a lot of other amps is I feel like I could pull this off with this amp if I wanted to. With other amps, it feels like the wheels are coming off, not with this. And let me dial the gain and the cutback where I want it, leave the boost off. I feel very similarly about the EQ of this amp. Let me show you. And I hope by that you can tell that we can really affect the frequencies of the amp quite drastically, especially the mids and the treble. But unlike a lot of other amps, all settings sound somewhat usable. With the treble all the way up, it's bright, but it's not ear-piercingly bright. With the mids all the way up, it's not super honky, it's very present. And I'm really impressed with this amp. Let's quickly check the global controls as well. Let's check the vintage mode real quick. Takes a lot of compression on the gain out of it. It's really nice for crunchy stuff. Let's dial the cut back a bit. And go down in gain. And let's switch the bite control to the middle. Opposite end of the spectrum. Thick thickens up quite a bit there. Let's add a bit more cut and put the byte switch back in the lower position again. This channel also takes boosts very nicely. And gain-wise, I believe the vintage mode stops where the modern mode roughly begins. Let's check that real quick. Yeah, there's a small bit of overlap there. Live, that's not going to help you very much because you have the same gain knob for both voices, voices. But in the studio, you can cover a lot of ground there. Last but not least, let's check out the clean channel. This is in brilliant mode. Let's switch over to warm mode. And you can tell it takes off an awful lot of the high end. It's a much warmer sound. I personally prefer the brilliant mode. That's where I'm going to stay. But even in brilliant mode, this clean channel is a little bit darker than I'm used to. I'd usually switch to the neck pickup. On the way I like clean channels because the bridge pickup would usually be too bright. But on this amp, I actually like using the bridge pickup for cleans as well. Sure, we can add a bit more mid and treble with the EQ. But I actually like how the bridge pickup sounds with this. See how far the gain goes. I'm going to turn down the master volume, add some gain. We can get some grit on there, but I much prefer this channel with very low gain and high channel volume. It's a bit too low. Actually, this is the perfect opportunity to show you the loop of the amp and another Lichtlaerm Audio pedal. Hold on a sec. I've got Lichtlaerm Audio's Untiefe reverb, nautical reverb on top of the amp right now. It's on, but the loop is still off. Let me turn it on. Switch to the neck. split pickups in the middle position. The loop off. And I've never really messed with effects pedals in the loop that often because I never really had any, but I bought this now and it's a lot of fun also on the high gain channels. Before we move on to the shootouts, I forgot to show you the gate. No buzz, buzz. No buzz, buzz. So that works. You can set it super extreme. Or you can set it rather low. See, it lets a bit of hiss there. Let's see, that stops about there. Doesn't cut into early, it's a nice gate. I don't really use gates for my demos or when I'm playing at home or even when I'm recording. I did used to use them though when I was playing in a band and when we were rehearsing or playing live. And with this amp I wouldn't even have to bring an external gate because I use a key-in gate from the first generation, the silver fronted one. Anyway, so yeah, that's it. It's a cool amp. Let's move on to the shootouts. Alright guys, I got the Prometheus and the VH4 hooked up to my amp switcher, and the Prometheus is dialed the way I like to play it, and the VH4 is dialed the way I dialed it last time I played it, so probably the way I like it too. Let's check out how the sound. We're starting with the Prometheus. Let's move over to the VH4. Immediately very different, but in my last video I said I never played the VH4 without a boost, so let's add in a boost and redo the... Alright, let's switch the boost off again. So still very different. With the boost in front, the VH4 becomes more competitive to my ears, but the Prometheus is still a lot tighter. The VH4 has a completely different mid signature. I'm wondering now how close we can get to the VH4 flavor with the Prometheus. So first of all, what I do is I dial the cut down almost all the way. The bite switch in the middle. So I've put the bite switch in the middle, I've dialed the cut pretty much all the way down on the Prometheus, took out some treble and added some presence, and that really shifted the Prometheus quite considerably in the direction of the VH4, at least in my ears. By the way, in the section before, I was playing an IR of the Lichtlaerm Audio LCR-150 speaker that I made myself, the Sweetspot IR. If you're interested in that, just head over to that video. I'll link it somewhere. You can download it in the video description there. For the shootout sections, I'm using a V30 IR, but one that I also made, so I know how it sounds. There's no trickery going on. It just seems a little unfair to me to use a Lichtlaerm Audio IR for shootout sections with a Lichtlaerm Audio amplifier. Just my thoughts there. Let's shoot them out against each other again without a boost. Still a bit different, but interesting how shapeable the Prometheus is. Let's add a boost to that and redo that. Well, they both react differently to a boost, for one thing, and the Diezel VH4 always retains that special Diezel mid-voice. At the same time, the Prometheus does get kind of close in feel, even if it doesn't sound exactly the same. I didn't expect it to, by the way. I'm just trying to establish how versatile the Prometheus is. Let's dial it back to my preferred settings. All right, that'll do for the VH4. Let's move on to the Savage. Okay, I've changed the VH4 out for the Engl Savage 120 Mark I. I'm on the lead channel on the Savage with the lead boost in. That's about it. No other switches pressed. Let's see how the Prometheus and the Savage compare to each other. That's surprising. The Prometheus sounds even tighter than the Savage. Let's play with some byte switch settings. Let's remove some cut. Okay, there was some slight volume differences, but I think they sound very close to each other now. I think the Prometheus still sounds a bit tighter, but yeah, that's pretty close to me. Let's add a boost. react differently to the boost. I think the Prometheus has a stronger response. It seems to be boosted more, for lack of a better word. Let's deactivate the boosting. So the amps seem to have a slightly different mid emphasis. The Prometheus seems to cut a little more, but overall, pretty close. I put the Prometheus back in the settings I had it in, and next up is the Marshall. Alright, Marshall JVM 410 HJS, the Joe Satriani JVM amp. Last time I had this out, I shot it out against the other Satriani signature amp, the PV-JSX, and personally, for high gain stuff, I think the JXS kicked its ass. I think the JSX sounded a lot tighter than the Marshall. So I'm interested to see how this compares to the Prometheus. We might want to check out how the Prometheus compares to the JVM on heavier crunch tones. Immediately, the Prometheus is much tighter and has way more gain. Now you might be saying, asshole, dial up the gain on the JVM, and I'd love to, but that doesn't really work. We're on the OD2, which is the same as OD1 red mode, so highest gain mode. And it doesn't get much more gainy, it just flubs out. And it's not much different on the orange mode, which I have on this one. Compare that to the Prometheus. Same thing, if we go up again, we don't really get much from it, we just lose definition. So that's about as high in gain as we can go. Let's add a boost though. If we start off with the JVM though, the Prometheus almost sounds harsh in comparison, and that just shows how relative our hearing is, or my hearing at least. But let's see if we can dial the Prometheus to sound a little closer to the JVM. First of all, way less cut and a lot less gain. Let's switch the bite mode to the center position. Again, we can get pretty close in feel. The Marshall still has a slightly different mid-voicing once again. It really seems that that's where the nuances between the amps live. Add a boost. seems the Prometheus still has a bit more sizzle as well. And overall, I think the Prometheus gain structure just sounds a little tidier to me. The Marshall gets a little messy, but that's rock and roll, I guess. Right, you have to have a 5150 in one of these things. It's just the law. And I had you guys vote between the PV 5150 script that I have and my EVH 5153 50 watt. And you guys voted for the EVH, which I'm quite happy about because I prefer the EVH. It's an amp with a very agreeable high gain tone. In fact, that's probably the reason why I don't use it more often. It's just too easy. It sounds too good. And I know that's a ridiculous reason not to play an amp. Oh, this amp makes me sound too good, but it's not a challenge. You just set everything at noon or slightly above, like here, and you're good to go. I'm still using a vintage 30 IR, although I've changed to a slightly darker one, just to mix things up. We're going to shoot the Prometheus out against the red channel and a bit against the blue. Let's go. So the Prometheus sounds a little tighter, it feels a bit more immediate. Let's add a boost. Overall, very similar voices. The EVH seems to have a little more low end and the Prometheus seems a little tighter, but I think you could easily compensate that on the Prometheus with a little bit of tweaking. Like we could add a bit more depth, a bit more bass, reduce the cut a little bit. I don't know how that came across on your end, but from where I'm sitting right now and listening here, that sounded pretty bang on. There's still a slight tonal difference, but my guesstimate tweaks, they worked for me. I'm very surprised. I'm actually very surprised at how well that worked. But the EVH's red channel is kind of a one-trick pony to me. It's got a very small usable gain bandwidth on the pot. And in my opinion, the blue channel is the money maker on the EVH amp. So let's give it a quick comparison to the blue. Obviously the Prometheus is much tighter, but the blue channel really needs a boost on the EVH, in my opinion, to sound its best. So let's kick that in and redo that part. Okay, I think the same observations apply as they did before compared to the red channel. The Prometheus is a little tighter, but you could easily remedy that by dialing back the cut a bit. And in this case, maybe taking out a bit of the gain. Well, quite a lot of the gain. Not identical, but same ballpark for sure. Let's move on to the final amp, the Framus Cobra, if it turns on. Shockingly, the Framus Cobra still works, and if you've seen my video on the amp, you know why I'm terrified of turning it on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the Prometheus to the lead channel of the Framus Cobra, and let's try out the clean channel, because the clean channel of the Cobra was very nice, so we'll leave out the crunches. Let's compare the clean channels. Nothing like a shootout to put things into perspective, and to me the cut control on the Prometheus is a real game changer. It really allows you to fine-tune the response of the amp. Now I'm not saying that using the cut control and the byte switch you can get the Prometheus to sound like all the other amps. I'm not saying that. Some amps just have an unmistakable identity. I can't get the Prometheus to sound like the VH4, for example. But what I am saying is that with the use of the controls that the Prometheus offers, you can quite drastically shift the way the amp behaves in one direction or the other. I also learned during the shootouts that I seem to tend to set the gain as high as I can get away with. So just about high enough before I start losing clarity and chord definition. And the Prometheus delivers a lot of definition even at super high gain settings. I noticed that compared to a lot of the other amps, the gain was set a lot higher on the Prometheus, and when I was adjusting them to sound similar, I had turned down the gain on the Prometheus quite a bit, in fact. There's been a lot of buzz about this amp, at least since it's made its debut at trade shows like NAMM and Guitar Summit. And I've been reading lately a lot of criticism about YouTubers hyping up new pieces of gear. And when it comes to this amp, I've made myself guilty of that, and as much as I dislike it, I'm somewhat part of that YouTube machine now. Except in this case, I stand by what I said, I stand by what I posted. It's warranted for this amp. I got heavily into amplifiers in 2018, so 6 years ago, and since then I've had a lot of amps come through here, and truth be told, I liked most of them. I could get along with most of them. There was just a handful of amps that I really couldn't get to work for me. So I'm not very hard to please, I'm not very picky. But this amp, I don't like this amp. I love it. It does everything I want an amp to do. It's everything I want in an amplifier. It is my new favorite amp by a healthy margin. Sorry, Habit. The cut control really makes this amp stand out, and that's just one of several really clever features that this amp has, like the preamp defeat switch or the 9-volt out on the foot switch. It's really clear to me that Daniel really racked his brains about how he could make this amplifier as useful as possible to musicians, and I honestly can't think of a way to make this better, except maybe at the cost of making it bigger and heavier. The only thing I can think of is making the high gain modern and vintage modes dedicated channels, like giving them each a gain, volume and 3-band EQ control. But that would make the amp a lot bigger and heavier, and that would only profit gigging musicians. For a studio application it makes no sense, and I've stopped gigging years ago. Other than that, yeah, you could add effects. Lichtlaerm Audio is great at effects, obviously, or you could have an onboard IR loader or something like that, but that's just gimmicks if we're honest about it. Tone is of course a personal thing, it's a preference, and your mileage may vary of course, but for me this amp is perfect. It's everything I ever wanted, and I don't regret selling anything to buy this amp. And if you have the chance to check this amp out at a trade show, or if you know somebody who has one, I deeply encourage you to try this amp out. Maybe harass Daniel to make some quad cortex, NAM, Tonix, what have you profiles, and you can get a taste of this amp somehow. I mean, it's not the real thing, but it might get you close. Yeah, do pester him and tell him I sent you. Keep an eye out for this amp on Lichtlaerm's website. I think for this version with the EL34 tubes, I paid €2,699. If you want bigger tubes like KT88s or 6550s or something, the prices go up. I think the highest spec model, the only difference between tubes was €2,999. I could be wrong. Check the website, it's bound to be up soon. That's all I have for you for today. Thank you so much for watching. Tell me what you think of the Prometheus in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.